Welcome to the Cape Fear River Assembly. I'm Troy Offen with the Executive Board. The Cape Fear River Assembly is a 45-year-old organization that gathers the input from various communities, municipalities, and user groups within the basin, and we try to give them one voice. We're using the forums as a mechanism to gather that input and to promote engagement amongst the various user groups for the long-term health of the river. Let's take a look at the forums.
And so we see a lot of things change as we convert a forest to an urban area. This is just a flow regime from just a generalized graph from a bunch of synthesized data in some Piedmont watersheds. But this is a typical discharge comparison between urban and a forested stream, where the forest peak flows are lower, flow in general is lower, low flows are also lower. To use a rational, robust, and defensible set of models to predict what the future land use of land cover might be at these very large spatial scales.
I want to take just 2 minutes, and then I have the pleasure of being able to release you to begin engaging in the room. You probably noticed there's a big whiteboard in the back where we're asking folks to share your ideas about what are those challenges, what are those potential solutions, and what can the Assembly focus on in the next year to begin taking steps toward that.
Well, the status of the river varies a lot from one to the other end. As you probably know, this is the largest river basin in the state, and even though it's only 17% of the land area, it contains 1/3 of the people in North Carolina. So it's very highly developed, so things are going to vary a lot. When you get to the headwaters, you've got communities like Greensboro, you've got Burlington, you've got other places like Graham that are growing very quickly. And then when you leave Jordan Lake, you've got very little development until you get to Fayetteville. And then Fayetteville has its own needs and issues. You leave Fayetteville and you go by all the large confined animal operations. And then you finally end up in Wilmington. And of course their interest is a lot in tourism and recreation and keeping the water clean for the future of their businesses.
I'm not sure of how it really compares to other river basins. I'm sure they're all individual, but the Cape Fear River Basin in North Carolina is the only river basin that actually has a direct connection with the Atlantic Ocean. So once you deepen, the estuary, to the point where it's 52 feet now, and they actually are proposing to deepen it even further, then you have that increase of salinity moving further upstream. You have that saltwater wedge moving further upstream. So now we have saltwater, almost reaching the base of Lock and Dam 1. You're talking 25 plus miles, 30 plus miles above Wilmington. So now you have fisheries, anadromous fish or migratory fish, who are moving from the Atlantic Ocean all the way up to freshwater, trying to spawn, getting to their historical spawning sites.
Excuse me for interrupting, but
that's okay.
Aren't there 3 dams that block them from doing that?
We have 3 dams, Lock and Dams 1, 2, and 3.
Okay.
And we're fortunate that the Corps of Engineers, as part of that original Wilmington Harbor deepening project that they did in, I believe it was 2003, that they constructed that. They built a rock arch rapids at the base of Lock and Dam 1 as part of mitigation for blasting in the Wilmington Harbor to avoid and help minimize impacts to Atlantic sturgeon and short-nosed sturgeon, our 2 federally endangered species of migratory fish in the Cape Fear River Basin.
Well, one of the things we did today in our lab before I came over here was use the software that Catherine Deininger's got a poster about in the next room, which is iTree, and we looked at what the benefits are of trees in the landscape, and it was an opportunity to talk about how trees do so much for watersheds, and particularly the ability of trees in the landscape to stop pollutants from getting into the streams. They are probably the best resource we have for flow over the landscape of things like fertilizers and things that come off of cars, car brakes and exhaust and so forth. So we're really looking at using software and an app, different scenarios of tree planting to see how the water quality would be improved.
I believe that we internally reflect our environment, and when our environment is dark and when it is devoid of light and when it is polluted, we ourselves, we we become that, and we need to overcome it in order to grow as people and as a community. And conversely, when we grow up surrounded by trees and sunshine and clean water and clean air, we can think about and embrace our wildest dreams.
We said, how serious of a problem are each of the following water pollution impacts to people and communities in your area? And they could say it's an extreme problem, serious problem, moderate problem, slight problem, or no problems. I'm not going to do all the math, but you can see that just about half the people said it's either an extreme or serious problem for loss of habitat or desirable species, which is really quite good. People do care about the ecology. Next in line was contaminated drinking water, and our survey was done right around the time of Flint, Michigan. Increased water treatment costs, which certainly people like Mick and Tad and others care a lot about. Polluted swimming areas, which you can see that's getting to be almost a third of the people think it's either a slight problem or no problem. And then you can see lower quality of the water, it smells bad or it tastes bad. Probably nobody's drinking water directly out of the river anyhow. But reduced boating and canoeing, that's kind of the least kind of serious impact that people see.
What am I going to be talking about today? I want to talk about some of the hurricane impacts that we came across at the city of Fayetteville. I'll get you a little board with some numbers. We had 3 major roadways that were washed out, and you may think, well, there were more roadways that were closed during Hurricane Matthew. We had some areas that received 7-8 inches of rainfall, while we had some other areas that had anywhere from 12 to 17 inches within that time frame. Heavy downpours have increased in frequency and intensity in the last 50 years.
Stormwater can become a sort of resource as opposed to a problem. I think oftentimes people talk about stormwater as a problem. I think about it as your resource.
So if we really want to have a large basin-wide effect, we must work with the people who own that resource. That's what my project is about. My poster is over here. We developed an outreach program where we targeted private landowners here in the Sand Hills area, and most of the Sand Hills drains into the Cape Fear River.
One of the things that I've always advocated is not the interwater basin transfer, as Cary and Raleigh and those upstream want to take the water out of the Cape Fear River and then put it back into the Neuse River. We believe, at least down here in this part of the state, that, yeah, they need water. It's the lifeblood of everything. Use the water, but put it back in the Cape Fear River Basin.
I didn't attend a church. It's one of the oldest churches in North Carolina or in the United States. It's called Old Bluff Presbyterian. I think it was formed and founded in 1758. And as a little boy, Sunday afternoons we would maybe take a family outing. Don't think I'm strange, but it's the graveyard and around the church. If you would see the church, you would think it was something from Williamsburg. It's just a beautiful old church, old building, and it's just a very quiet and peaceful. It's just a way that you can really feel good about yourself and feel good about what the good Lord's made. And this church is on the banks of the river, but I mean you have to walk a little ways down to the river from the church, but you come to the church and it's just sort of a flat farmland, and once you go to the wood line you start down this little path, and once you start down the path it's like you go from flat farmland to almost like being in the mountains. It's just like a whole different world, huge trees, birds singing, flowers, and just the smell of the river itself, and it's just a very peaceful place, and I've grown up going back and forth there. Every now and then I just go over there on the afternoon, especially late in the evening, just go over there and just walk to the river. It's very peaceful.
Well, the changes, again, I hate to keep repeating myself, but I think that it's worth repeating. The river is a life force in our state. It provides us with many different things. Again, it's part of our rich history and heritage. As you said, many people fish in that river. Many generations enjoy swimming on that river. They live by the river. But then there's the darker side of the river, which is the onslaught of industry pollution, large corporation pollution like Duke Energy and DuPont, intentionally, recklessly, polluting our waterways where the citizens get their drinking water. So I would say, and then when you look at things like Hurricane Matthews that bring about major flooding, and I know because Hurricane Matthews flooded my family's business of 30 years, so I have been directly affected by these environmental disasters. Those floods raise the water in the Cape Fear River, and we learned about that tonight. And a lot of the water that then is poured into the river is filled with a lot of toxins also and pollutants that all then go out to our beautiful ocean.
Discharging Gen X into the river. And so these are the data that some of you might be familiar with. I just got them from the CFPUA webpage, especially here in the Wilmington area. And I thought of interest would probably also be an update on some of the home filter studies that households here in the Wilmington area and sample tap water and home filters. And Zach Hopkins has been doing most of the analyses, and then Mason and Elisa were students and postdocs in my lab. And
the poster that I have discusses broadly the significance of the Lower Cape Fear River, which for our purposes is from Snow's Cut south to the mouth where it meets up with the Atlantic Ocean, the significance of that stretch of river to colonial nesting waterbirds and the shorebird, the American oyster catcher. The Lower Cape Fear River is one of the largest concentrations of nesting waterbirds in the state of North Carolina.
What we're talking about is managing the amount of stormwater that's bringing those pollutants into our waterways and creating impaired waters. In connection with that, we're also presenting publicly today for the first time about the coastal Cape Fear River blueprint that we've been working on with a bunch of collaborators in the room, including some of your professors here.
My greatest concern right now is saltwater intrusion as a consequence not so much of sea level rise or expansion, but as a direct consequence of dredging the Cape Fear River to facilitate shipping. What that has resulted in is wide-scale habitat loss as a result of saltwater drowning of our bottomland hardwood swamps. I work with two of the rarest animals in North America, both of them from originally the Lower Cape Fear tributaries, beaver ponds specifically. But as a direct result of saltwater intrusion, both of those animals are now extirpated from the wild, no longer in the wild. The last living representatives are in my captive care.
Well, I lived in North Carolina for 20 years, and during that period of time, with the work that we were doing on animal waste management in the hog industry particularly, which has a very significant presence in this watershed, I learned a lot about the river and the concerns about the control of that. And now for half of the year, we live here in Fayetteville, and we will soon be living down the river here a ways at Del Webb in south of Wilmington. So we're going to be close to the river for a long time. So what happens to it in the future and how it is handled and managed and preserved is very important to us.
One of my big focuses is on general water quality and being able to sustain that. So not only that we have clean water for drinking and recreation and for species use, including endangered species, but that we're treating it in a way that we can maintain that, once I become a mom too for this area.
We got into research a few years ago on the farm because, in all honesty, I was a corporate farmer. Yep. We were growing 1 million turkeys a year, and we understand what that kind of animal and what kind of pollution can come from that. And it spurred interest that when I finally gave up the farm, I gave it into wetland restoration, which is true filtration. And we did a 2-year-long experiment with biochar, which is like putting a carbon filter into the soil that acts as a water filter to water coming off of our farms. And so that farm was a major portion of the Cape Fear sub-basin. And so great interest in the life and health of the Cape Fear River.
I'm a member on the board of Cape Fear River Watch, and we've been looking at the river for a long time and trying to use what we call education and advocacy to try and understand all the components of the river so that we can tell the community, you know, what are the benefits, what are the problems with the Cape Fear River. And in looking at that, one of the things that I try to do is take that information that we have and get it to the community to understand it a little bit better so that they actually realize how beneficial and important the Cape Fear River really is to them. Historically, the Cape Fear River was the navigation stretch going all the way up to Fayetteville, moving the barges up and down. It has historically been a fishery, particularly for herring, which is now kind of defunct in our river. It's also a cultural historical avenue because Wilmington, North Carolina was the naval stores capital of the entire world back in the 17 and 1800s. And I have a big hook with the whole watershed and the lower watershed anyway because my wife's grandfather actually operated the ferry that went across from Brunswick County over to Wilmington at Market Street. My father worked on the Liberty ships in the Brunswick River, and he also helped bring the battleship North Carolina in. He was a tug operator for a period of time. So anytime that I have a chance to tell people about how beautiful the river is, what it is economically, culturally, historically, that's really what we want to do.